Greetings for another Shaper Sessions. This week we've got Kevin Fitzke, and he's a fine boat builder. He works on classic modern boats.
I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah, we're going to dig into a bit of his background, how he works on boats. We're going to look at some of the techniques, some that include origin, some that don't. But yeah, the world will be your oyster, Kevin. So we're going to start with a little showcase of some of the works he's been working on. You'll be able to follow along with them on his Instagram. So have a look at the slides now, and we'll quickly start skipping through these. And Kevin's going to talk to you about the various boats and things we show as we go through them. So if you can switch to the slide deck. Goose. We've got Goose running the system here today. He's going to keep us busy, keep us honest. And as always, jump in with your questions. So you can see the sort of classic modern look that he goes for, but over to you, Kevin. Walk us through what we're looking at here.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kevin Fitzke. I'm the owner, builder, designer of Fitzke Boat Works, and it's just myself up in a small shop in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I've got two different things that I design and build. One is paddle boards that have kind of an old school wood boat aesthetic to it, and then I design and build full-size wood boats that kind of have a tip of the hat to the old school days, but are built with modern technologies of adhesives, varnishes, even plywoods, and then incorporating tooling like Shaper Origin.
So that first one was your paddleboard, right? What do you call it? The bootlegger or something?
Yes. I'm sorry, I can't quite see the slide on my end, but
okay.
Yes, my first paddleboard is called the bootlegger, and kind of the whole idea behind that was I wanted to have a storage compartment that you could basically hide something, whether it's a water bottle, you want to bring a towel or a lunch or something out on the water, and then you can sort of basically tuck any of that storage stuff away, and then it still has the aesthetics of sort of a wood boat. And so hence then with bootlegging, you want to hide something and get the heck out of there real fast. So this particular shape of a paddleboard is designed to go fast in the water, but it's stable enough to where it's just a recreational, you can hang out on the lake all day long, or you can paddle it and get a great workout in. So it's kind of a great, hybrid of both styles of paddleboarding. It's about 12.5 feet long, and then it has kind of a taper on it, but the widest part is 32 inches and then tapers down to about 28. So it's about the same specs as really any other paddleboard out there. So anybody that if you've been paddleboarding can hop on it and shouldn't have any issues with it.
Yeah, it looks awesome. And you got custom paint jobs for all the different varieties based on customer asks, yeah?
Yeah, yep. So it's a combination of, most people like that checkerboard thing. So, a lot of the times just kind of mix and matching different paint patterns or color checkerboard with that. Or another thing is I can do a couple different wood stains, and then if they don't want the checkerboard pattern, we can do some different shapes for how that paint is either going over the deck or on the sides, and then the whole bottom can get its own different color of paint as well.
Awesome. We've got a few coming up in a little bit.
Kind of
so maybe we'll talk to that when we get to them in the slides. I guess we'll try and skip through these. Eric, this is Bug Bite, yes?
Yeah, so this was a fun boat that I had built. It was originally designed in 1935, and the plans were published in the February issue of Motorboat magazine. And so it was kind of a cool concept back in the day. They were trying to promote boat racing and getting more boats to enter into these different races. So a lot of these designers back in those days would publish their plans so somebody could basically build their own boat in their garage or their shop or backyard, and then show up to these races and have some fun. So with this particular boat, I built it with what's called cold molding, or it's kind of the newer way of building boats. Sorry about that. And oops. And so basically, what I did is it's a combination of using the cold molded lumber and then glued up with basically epoxy for everything, and then you encapsulate all of that with a different varnish or with epoxy, and then you can put varnish or paint then right over it. So it's a kind of an indestructible way of building a boat, and it lasts a really long time compared to kind of a traditionally built boat. So
awesome.
Sorry about this place.
No, that's all good. We're looking at the slides mostly, so we'll go through the other a few of the remainder of these, and then we'll get into how you actually go about it, and do a little tour of your shop and get some background information about how you got to where you are.
Sure. Give me 1 second here.
So this, we're looking here at his paint booth, and this is, I believe, the same model of paddleboard, but a different paint job. You'll see he's got a lot of different paint jobs that are actually kind of awesome. Are they? Where are they inspired from, the paint jobs? I guess these are sort of traditional boat designs.
Yeah, a lot of it comes from airplanes. So, for instance, like on this particular one that you see, a lot of World War I biplanes had kind of multicolored patterns, checkerboard patterns, different shapes. And so that's where I kind of take a lot of the inspiration from and kind of run with it from that.
Awesome. Yeah, they look great. And then, and this is more of a traditional kind of like teak decking you see on like bigger super yachts and things, right? Like that's a whole different process.
Yeah, it's very similar to that, or it's a little more also similar to kind of your classic Chris Craft or Hacker Craft, or kind of your standard wood boat where you've got the real classic pinstripe aesthetic kind of going on. And so with this particular one, I route in those seams just like you would on a real boat, and then go back and you fill it in then with some paint, and kind of gives that nice two-tone contrast with the paint and the two different wood stain colors.
Awesome. Yeah. Now I've actually noticed someone on our Instagram feed doing a similar thing with inlaying, like sort of making nautically themed furniture. I believe it was in France. I'll have to find a link to that.
Oh, cool.
This one's great. Sorry, I had to rotate these slides to make sure they were clear enough, rotated around that angle. But yeah,
it's all good.
We'll now get into a bit about your background. So how did you get into this field? How were you trained?
Well, I grew up in my dad's woodworking shop, and made all the mistakes and learned everything that I possibly could through him, and through just thinking of random projects and models that I wanted to build. I went to school then for design, and then after school I worked professionally for a boat restorer here in Minnesota, and really learned a lot of the tricks of the trade, some secrets, I guess you could call it, and really kind of took it to the next level. And then a couple years ago, I then jumped in the deep end and doing this full time now. So kind of a little progression from more or less my dad's woodworking shop. And but the wood boats thing I've always just been fascinated by them. I love the character in them. I love the different shapes and the way they ride in the water, the way they look in the water. They just have kind of a great personality to them.
Yeah.
And trying to keep that whole wood boat handmade kind of thing moving forward.
That's awesome. So you've set up in it's a pretty modestly sized shop, right, for what you're doing. You've got what's the maximum size boat you usually work on?
So the biggest boat I can bring in here is about 24 feet or so.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you just enough room to kind of walk around it, more or less. But 21.
Yeah, I'm here. You might have cut out a bit there. 20 feet approximately, yeah?
The biggest I can do is
24.
about 24.
24, yeah, yeah.
But a nice, comfortable is about 22 or less.
Yep. Makes sense.
Otherwise, be
Perfect for this style, right? Are these like, would you
yeah.
say, the sort of James Bond type era, the cigar boats or something like that? Is that the similar themed boats, or am I just seeing a wooden boat?
Yeah, or even a little bit earlier than that. A lot of pre-war
Mm-hmm.
boats is where I get a lot of the inspiration from,
Mm-hmm.
both with the designs of that time period and just the aesthetics that a lot of that kind of golden era, um, boats and cars, fashion, music, whatever
Yeah,
kind
awesome.
of had.
We'll do a little. We should do a little shop tour and take a look around at
Sure,
how you make this all work.
sure. My stand just decided to not work, so I'm gonna have to hold my phone here. So pardon
That'll
the
be a good
shakiness
workout. If
here.
you start sweating and wincing, we'll know what's up.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, if you can walk us through your shop and show the various, I see some like scale models there and some
yeah,
pedal boards, all sorts. Yeah.
sure. So um, down here is, we can talk about this in a little while, but this is a scale model of one of my boat designs that I used Origin to cut all the different framework pieces out. But this kind of section right here that I'm standing in is kind of where a lot of the machinery is at: table saw, drill presses, chop saw, sanders, that type of a thing. And I walk over here, and um, one of the big projects I've been working on for a while is the restoration work of a 1960 Riva, Florida. And so it's been a pretty fun process of putting a whole new bottom on, whole new sides, new deck, some framework.
And
We're
is
having
this
a
a view of
company.
that cold molding building process you were talking about?
Yes, yep. So what's kind of neat about cold molding is it's a bunch of layers that you glue up with epoxy. So, for instance, on this particular boat, there's like, I'm not sure if you can kind of see in here a little bit, but there's two layers of about 1/8 inch plywood, and then on the outside here is about a 1/4 inch thick of solid wood, and all of that is glued together with epoxy. So the advantage you have doing it this way is the lumber is really stable, so the wood's not going to expand or contract on you, so you don't have seams that open up or split on you. And then it can just, it's a lot stronger construction, so it can just hold up to the elements of, being a boat out on the water or on a trailer or just in storage.
Mm-hmm. Is a trailered
Um,
boat, is that where they experience a lot of shock and they're more likely to be damaged on a trailer than actually out in the water?
they can be, yeah, because it's just kind of, it's hopping up and down,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the boat's used to being able to kind of have a little bit of forgiveness with the water. Um, where the
So
trailer's got kind of some hard points, but
awesome. I'd encourage everyone to get on Instagram, not right now, but he's got a bunch of shots of this in process. You'll see the various stages
yeah.
of this. And actually, Goose, if you can
So
maybe,
here,
you might be able to get a shot of that in the slide deck of the cold molding with those panels separated. There's a slide we got floating around in there somewhere. But we'll keep
yeah.
moving and come back to that, yeah?
What's kind of neat about this particular boat is when Riva originally built this, they made the sides and the bottom all as one basically molded piece. And so you'll see in some of the photos later on, I replicated making the whole sides and the bottom as one particular piece, and then glued up, the outside wood to kind of make it look a nice planked hull. Then, so it's a little bit different construction technique, but it gives a really cool aesthetic when it's all done. It's kind of a nice seamless look then, and kind of compared to some other construction techniques.
No, that's crazy.
And
you were saying like part of the modernization process of this is you sometimes hot them up a bit with interesting motors and whatnot. Yeah.
on some of them, yeah, we'll put an upgraded motor in it, just more from a reliability standpoint. They generally have more power in them from the original motors, so it's kind of a turnkey application when it comes to that point. But
yeah, so Goose is just right now skipping through the process. I think this one, if you look at your camera screen, you'll be able to see that curved panel is moved to the side of the boat. So that's that cold molding kind of.
Yeah, so that's this whole side here, and so I had taken those thin pieces of plywood, glued them all on the outside to basically replicate or recreate that whole one continuous shape. And then you can basically pull it off the boat as one part, more or less. And then I put that, when it gets put back onto the boat, then that's where I put these individual pieces of wood back on to kind of create the, planked look of what you'd normally assume a wood boat would be.
That's epic, yeah. And that's just unimaginable numbers of clamps and things, right? There's no like sort of vacuum bagging or anything you can do for that, yeah?
I don't really do vacuum bagging, but some people do.
Mm-hmm.
Vacuum bagging's a really great way to clamp things down because you got a perfect amount of pressure, but it also needs a lot of help with other people help, putting the tape down and vacuum bags and stuff, and it's a little difficult to do that when you're kind of by yourself.
So you're a one-man show pretty much all the time, or occasionally get someone to tag in for particular operations?
I'll have some help here and there, but 90% of the time it's just myself, and then my dad will come in every once in a while and help out throughout the week on various stages of the project too. And so,
what's the recommended soundtrack to keep you busy in there?
Oh man, I listen to a little bit of everything, country to rock, some jazz,
All things good.
I guess it kind of just depends on the mood,
Yeah, awesome. So we'll keep moving around and look at some other boats and things we've got cooking, and just feel free to call out anything interesting as we make it around. Obviously, or not obviously, maybe I'll explain to the people observing. We're looking at Kevin Fitzke's boat shop, and he's going to talk us through how he's integrated Origin into his workflows. A lot of obviously very traditional boat woodworking with some modernization in terms of technologies, materials, but also techniques and things with Origin. So this one's an interesting one.
So what we're looking at right now with all these little spring clamps is a bootlegger paddleboard that we had kind of mentioned and seen some finished photos before. And so this is sort of a behind the scenes building process of how I put these together. What I use Origin for is after I draw all the parts out I prefer AutoCAD, but each one of these frame pieces here, you kind of see on the build jig, I'll just cut out with Origin, and then I set them up in different stations basically to glue them all up. And so this particular one has all the framework up. I just put this rear deck on in the back, and then these sections that you see all these little spring clamps on are basically this top edge, which is called the shear. It kind of gives the top curved part of the deck of a boat, or kind of that, leads up to the front of the boat where it's the bow, and then kind of goes to the back. The bottom part that is usually in the water is called a chine, and so that's this kind of section kind of going up here. And what I do is I laminate a couple pieces of plywood to then create a thicker piece, so in that way I can get the curve the way I want it, and then it's dimensionally really stable because those two little thin pieces of plywood are then glued together with some epoxy, so it's not going to want to shift or move around at a later date, or humidity or moisture differences or temperature change. And go into the back here. is sort of just what would be underneath. You can kind of, hopefully you can sort of see some of those
Yeah,
framework
totally.
pieces.
Yep, no, that looks
Um,
a perfect origin project there.
yeah, this is great. Just to be able to kind of cut things quick and accurate and not have to trace things out by hand with like a template and then go over to a bandsaw and then sand away all your bandsaw marks and whatever else, you know.
So we should probably call that out
Here's kind of the
as we
back
go
end.
through. Like, you are familiar with and do occasionally use a full CNC, correct?
Every once in a while, yeah, if there's a big part that needs to be cut, or a lot of repetition in a part where, you know, just setting up origin to cut, you know, a big piece or something just might be too much of a pain in the butt, or just not time feasible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a little easier to use a CNC, but I'd say using the origin is a little easier for boat building, because when you get into, like, the plywood doesn't really matter with, you're not so concerned about going knots and grain direction, but as you can see on the image on the slide, when you're cutting the solid wood like white oak or mahogany, you can really use origin to scan it and then see where the grain patterns are going to be and use that to your advantage for those particular parts. And then if there's a knot in that board, you can just cut right around it, or, you know, work with the board that way. So
Yeah, you were saying, like, if you had to send off a job to a CNC, and then, you know, they might get their stock ordered directly to them, you've got to kind of, you don't get the opportunity to work around those knots and take advantage of, like, the curve and the grain, and
right,
you miss
yep,
out on some options there. Yeah, no, it's interesting.
yep, for sure.
And you're not producing like tens of boats. It's more sort of unique one-offs. That approach rather than like volume production. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. So, you know, it might be a couple paddle boards a month type of a thing, or a couple paddle boards every couple months. Might be, you know, one or two boats a year sort of a thing. So it's definitely low volume definition of building things, but, you know, it's the accuracy and the attention to detail, I think, is what's kind of the advantage with it all, then with going that route. So
And you're calling the shots throughout. Yeah.
yeah, I don't have to listen to anybody else, I guess. But
Actually, this one's got that
so
that last one had the way you were tracing those panels using that little lattice technique there is kind of super interesting. That wasn't something I'd seen before, but was a super interesting way of
yeah,
taking a complex, curved in multiple dimensions form and then getting flat elements out of it. Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the neat thing about boats, is it might look sort of like a straight line, for instance, on a plank, but if you were to take that plank off the boat, it's actually got a big curve to it. It's a little deceiving on some of that.
So that's not necessarily an origin-specific workflow there. I mean, it could be if you approached it that way, but this is just a really interesting technique. I saw hadn't noticed it before, and yeah, it looks like a great way to get those elements.
Yeah, if you're real good with like Fusion or some other 3D modeling program, you certainly could draw or take the sides here and, you know, pull that from your 3D model or your 3D drawing, I'm sorry, and then you could cut that out, like especially if you're doing out of plywood, you could cut that whole shape out, and then it should just fit then right back on when you're assembling the boat. There's kind of a technique called stitch and glue boats that sort of use that style, where you're kind of cutting the pre-made panels more or less, and then you use a technique of kind of stitching them together with, you know, zip ties or wire, and then you use epoxy to kind of glue it all together. So that definitely could be something utilized, you know, with Origin, if you're real good with drawing things in a 3D form on the computer and then extract those different elements to then cut out those parts.
I've looked at a few of those. Are they they maybe looked a little more agricultural than these elegant forms you've got here, but still a pretty cool process.
Yeah, they definitely got their limits on how you can kind of shape or bend or manipulate the wood to kind of get the different curves you want. Um, it's just more of kind of an aesthetic thing, I guess, is what it would boil down to on kind of what you'd prefer.
Yeah, so we're looking now at, I think the next few slides are looking at that lattice approach. So if we skip through them, Goose, we'll be able to see. So you then remove those off. You can talk us through this, Kevin.
Yeah, so what you're looking at now is kind of back to the Riva boat here. So each of those boards that are laying down and then have kind of that lattice thing. That lattice is a template that I had made from the original sides of the boat. So there's 6 different planks kind of going down the side here. And on the original boat, I had to figure out a way to know where each of those planks have to be, because when I go to remold this whole side, you're going to lose all those original planks. And so making kind of that lattice work was a really neat technique that I learned. And you can basically retrace or remake your full-size template and then put that down on your milled piece of lumber, cut it out, and you've got, kind of the new shape of the side plank then. And then a couple different ways to then install that after you cut it.
You got some good marking techniques to keep track of what's the top and bottom, and you got some interesting nautical notations to keep track of all the elements, yeah?
Yeah, and you gotta kind of just be consistent with it, because if you forget what is up or what's forward or what's out and what's in,
yeah,
you'll kind of learn the hard way, and then you got to remake that part again, and I've done that numerous times.
Yeah, we'll have to chat with you more about that. That's all that sort of stuff. Super interesting.
Yeah.
The different fields within woodworking and all the different notations they use.
Yep. Sorry if I'm spinning this thing. I'm trying my best at holding the camera here for you.
Yeah, we'll head back to your shop maybe and have a look at your some of the other.
You want to see the paint booth there?
Yeah, that'd be great. You were saying you've got a paddleboard ready to send out. So this one's been painted and looks immaculate. What percentage of your shop is paint booth?
So my paint booth is 10 feet by 16 feet by 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
I will show you that here in a second. So I can fit, the paddle boards in here real easily. But so here is a finished board.
That's the business. And you were saying this is you got customers all over the world, right?
Yeah, this particular one is going to be going to Germany.
We know a few people in Germany.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be some orders from Stuttgart after this.
So this one I did kind of my, sort of signature off-white and green and yellow checkerboard pattern, and then I make up this stain color. It's kind of a walnut honey brown color, and then this is all the mahogany plywood that I use, and then right now I've been kind of finishing out a little trim piece that'll go around. It's kind of a little metal edge band that'll go here. But then here's a traction pad so you can not slip when you're out on the water.
Nice. And then I notice you got all your graphics are epic. Are they all what are they, like vinyl cut or some kind of mask and gold leaf spray paint?
Most of them are gold leafed or copper leafed, or I have done some silver leafing before.
Careful, you'll get Andy Berkey all worked up over gold leaf.
So it just kind of depends on what we're going for. Otherwise, all the paint is done by hand. I mask, everything off here by hand. It just kind of takes a little while, but I think it creates a really neat look instead of just, it actually might be a little difficult to make to try to get like a sticker or something to kind of just with the way the shape kind of goes down here and then folds over. But
No. And what are you using for your? Is it like just that frog tape, or what's your standard masking approach there?
I actually use it's a masking stuff that's used in kind of the sign making world, where they can kind of die cut it out with a like a special printer. So if you want a specific shape or something, and then I use fine line tape by 3M to then get the real nice kind of just crisp lines. Oops, sorry about that. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's really makes it look extraordinary. Customers will be stoked. What would you say, obviously incredibly wealthy customers, yeah?
Yeah, I would think they're on the, they can spend a little bit of extra money, I think, here and there, I guess, would be the best way to describe them.
On that topic, maybe we'll go back and start looking at that third scale prototype and talk about the advantages of working like that, developing the idea,
Sure
selling an idea to a client, and all the advantages of that. You mentioned you often the client actually receives that as part of the manufacture of their boat, yes?
Yeah, so the idea is that, we can draw up a design for someone, and then...
so a lot of people don't like... actually, Eric, if you can switch to the slide deck of the diagram first, of the CAD drawing. A lot of people, in terms of the client side of things, who are not fabricating things every day, they don't relate very well to drawings and, sections, plans. Like this to some people is like, okay, the shape's kind of organic, but they're not really understanding the full nature of the 3D model, which actually Kevin's called out all the various elements here. So pause on this frame, come back later when we upload this to YouTube, and you'll be able to see like all the terms referring to the specific elements, and then we'll jump back to the live view, and he'll walk you through what that means in third scale.
Yeah, so what you're looking at right now is the 1/3 scale of a runabout design that I developed. And the idea with making the scale models first is you can just verify what you think is going to look good on paper or computer, basically, and then develop the scale model just to make sure it's exactly kind of what you want it to look like. And then if everything's all good to go, then all you got to do is just, instead of scaling your parts down, you just cut everything out then at full scale via Origin. And so what I did with this particular one is I scaled it down to a 1/3 scale. So this full-size boat is going to be about 22 feet long. And this particular model is about 7 feet. It's like 6'8", I think, somewhere around in there. And the nice thing about working with this size of a model is it's a lot easier to cut kind of these smaller frame pieces out, because they get a little thin when you start to get real small, like a 1/4 scale or something like that. So being at a 1/3 scale, these parts just maintain a little bit of volume, so the adhesive or your double-sided tape or whatever you use to kind of clamp it down,
and you're talking about cutting this with Origin, right? Double-sided tape on the back of your stock, and then
correct,
this whole thing out with Origin. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm using plywood for just cutting all these parts. Obviously, in the real boat, I'd be using solid wood, and there'd be a couple different parts to then create each one of these frameworks. But this is the idea of the scale model, is more or less to show the general shape of how you want it to look. And so kind of going back to the 1/3 scale, is it's a big enough shape that I can use the Origin to cut each of the pieces out. But then what I think is even more important is I can build a jig and actually assemble this model almost identical to how the real boat is going to be built. So you can get an idea of kind of, is this piece going to go right here, or should I put this piece first, or oh, I didn't realize, maybe this curve is a little weird. So I have to re-examine how to, either make, like for instance on this back end on the transom here, I was trying to figure out what's the best way to fabricate this piece here to kind of have more or less a dual compound curve this way and coming up this way, and how do you kind of attach it on the real boat and whatever. So it's kind of a real-time way of figuring things out, but if you make a mistake or need to change something, it's a lot easier to
It's plywood,
modify that with a
not teak.
No, yeah, so definitely not wasting a bunch of money or material on the little models here. So.
And then do you do anything like massing and sort of figuring out how it will sit in the water and stability and stuff, or is that done kind of mathematically based on your CAD?
It's mathematically done. There's different formulas that you can use to basically figure out where the center of buoyancy is going to be, which is basically the fancy term of determining where the center point of the hull, or what's going to be in the water, like the middle point.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to mathematically figure out then where's the center point of the relationship of the engine to the passengers, to the weight of your gas tank, to little things like a battery or storage, and you figure out where that center point is. And kind of then the trick is you try to line both the center of buoyancy up, or the center of the hull, to where the center of all those different points of the engine and the center of gravity is going to be. And then you can then determine or verify then how the boat's going to sit in the water and then perform when it's up on plane. So,
and that makes it
thankfully there's been a lot of research. I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, just wondering that the getting all those weight and buoyancy and everything to sort of coincide pretty closely makes it more stable and predictable, is it, to operate?
Yeah, exactly. You can pretty much figure out, or kind of reassure yourself that it's going to float the way you want it to float, and it's going to, drive or ride in the water the way you want it to be. And, it's not really too much of a guessing game or surprise when the real thing is built and you launch for the first time.
And how do the customers respond to that, the process of the scale model and things? Like, are they stoked to be a part of that, looking at it?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people just like seeing the model because it's just fun to kind of see a miniature version of what, the real thing's going to be. But I think what's really important is the client can really understand the shape of what it's going to look like. You can sit there and show all the 3D renderings via computer, but until you actually see the real thing, it may be difficult for that client to really understand, different elements of the boat, or different shapes of the boat, or, there's really this much room between the front seat and the back seat or something,
Mm-hmm.
and then, building a giant scale model like this really creates that understanding. And so there's either more excitement to have the real boat finished, and they'll get a they'll kind of know what to expect then for that whole process.
That's awesome. And then you had another couple up on the wall that were maybe done prior to Origin. How long have you had your Origin, by the way?
It's been, I think, almost 2 years, year and a half to 2 years, I think. Somewhere around there.
Yeah, maybe you can move over to, we can look at some of these props and things on the bench there, and you can talk us through the process of going from sort of, I don't know what we would call traditional woodworking techniques to more Origin workflows.
Sure thing. So I will this kind of brown thing you guys have been looking at that I've been walking around is a full scale frame piece to what this model is here. So this is just kind of a demo piece that I just stained up. The real frame would be painted, but what it is it comprises of, this particular one has 3 different parts to it. There's basically a side for the left side and a side for the right side, and then there's a piece that kind of creates the deck or the top. and I used Origin to cut all three of these pieces out. And so what was nice is the time that it took to cut this particular part um, was, I mean, within an hour of setting up, kind of getting the wood where you wanted it, and then actually doing the cutting. Where traditionally you would have to make a template from your drawing, trace that onto wood, and then cut that piece out with like a bandsaw, and then use a sander to get rid of all your bandsaw marks and to kind of get the shape up to your line. And nothing wrong with that technique, but it just takes a couple hours to do what you can do within less than an hour on the shaper.
That's awesome.
And so that's where that particular piece came into play. Kind of jumping back to my paddle boards, here's kind of an example of what those paddleboard shapes look like. So I take my drawing and then set the plywood up, and this is a marine grade plywood. I didn't mention that before. So it's made to be used for boat building. It's made to be submerged in water. It can get wet. It won't delaminate on you, and there's some characteristics of how they make marine plywood that's a little different than your standard kind of cabinet grade stuff that you might get at kind of your local hardware place or lumber shop. But anyway, so that's what all the paddleboard parts are cut out of. So it's real lightweight, but then it's really flat, and you got a lot of room to cut the big parts out, so you don't have to cut individual parts and then glue them together like you do the full scale or full size frames for a boat.
And that cuts pretty nicely. Are you using any sort of custom cutter for that one, or you just use the stock Origin carbide 2 fluter?
Just the stock carbides work awesome. The plywood itself, I would say, is very similar to cutting like Baltic birch, if any of you are familiar with that. Mm-hmm. The nice thing is there's no voids in this particular plywood, just like Baltic birch has, and it's real flat, so you buzz around real quick and you got your part. The carbide bits, they don't really bind up at all or anything like that. And then with like the white oak, which is what I use to cut all these parts for the full-size boats out on, that's just a matter of just kind of taking your time and doing one pass at like a 1/4 inch depth, second pass at each 1/4 inch increments, and then for instance, this is a 3/4 inch thick piece of lumber for these frames, and some frames might be about an inch thick, but generally nothing thicker than that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, that works perfectly. And then to seal in that the wood, the marine ply, is it just like spar varnish or something, or do you use like epoxies and stuff like that as well?
I use epoxies to seal the plywood on the inside. So after you assemble it all together, like what you had seen on that frame, the jig I had with all those spring clamps, is I'll take some real thin down epoxy. It's almost kind of like the same viscosity as water, and we just brush that on the inside, and that seals it up and waterproofs it from the inside. And then on the outside, I'll actually fiberglass the bottom. And the fiberglass will add in some strength, but then also creates a watertight seal, so not going to get water inside, and then helps it float. And then from there, it's just varnish for the areas that are over any of the stain or any of the paint.
That makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, no, they look great. And then, are there any? If there's any other like boat examples you want to dig into before we get into some of your collaborations with other industries? Yeah.
Sure. I think the biggest thing with using the Origin for the boat stuff is whether you design the part yourself or you can take an existing plans and you just kind of modify the plans a little bit to upload as a SVG file. It's the amount of time that you save on using Origin to cut all these parts, and then the accuracy it's just awesome how you can really expedite that whole process. And then if you want to repeat anything, it there again, you just kind of go back in your files and recut the part. So if you make a mistake or you want to build 2 or 3 of something, like in an assembly line or whatever, it really makes that whole process, really enjoyable and quick.
You were mentioning one thing that was pretty cool, like you've got your files up on Shaper Hub, and if there's ever an incident with a boat that's out in the field and it's damaged in some way, let you describe what you were talking about there.
Yeah, so to a certain extent, I kind of use the analogy of, your car, you get in an accident or something, you bring that to a body shop and you need to order up a new bumper. Well, kind of the same can go with a boat where something happens where you might hit a dock or, have an incident with the trailer or something. And, for instance, like a piece like this breaks off and you can get access to fixing it without taking the side off. Or if you do have to take the side off and you can then get access to it, we can recut this whole section out for you, and then it shows up like you got your new bumper at an auto body shop, and you can, glue it back in and you're good to go. So obviously there's a little more in depth on how to repair that, but the idea is that we can remanufacture a broken part or section or entire frame, and it could be shipped out and kind of re-put together then on the boat.
Starting with known dimensions at least gives you more of a chance there than trying to guess everything on site. Yeah, that's
right.
Interesting. And then we'll move along. Are there any other little examples there you want to dig into, or should we go on to the wheels and things?
I was just going to maybe show sort of what, if I can rotate it here for you. There's kind of what 2 of the boards look like with the forward decks on. So the board on your left, I've cut the initial kind of curve out on the top deck, and then the one on the right, I had just glued that plywood on and getting ready to then cut that curve out. What I was mentioning before about storage and kind of hiding something, hence the name bootlegger, that's kind of where this little storage compartment is underneath there, so you can fit
moonshine.
And get your moonshine in there, a beer or an Nalgene bottle or whatever you'd like. And so that's kind of how that works out. And this has got that routed groove top on it that I'll then infill with some paint and kind of give that more traditional kind of classic wood boat look with one of the photos I'd shown prior.
Yeah, nice. We'll have to get, if anyone's interested in seeing those on Shaper Hub, we'll have to start applying some pressure.
That's right.
Nice. And then we'll you've worked with people in the automotive industry, is that correct? I remember seeing a thing on your Instagram. I don't know if you've got some examples of that floating around we can walk through.
I have. So one thing I've been kind of getting into a little bit is making some steering wheels and using Origin to basically cut a wood part or the wood rim and then adhering that to an existing metal spoke section, or we laser cut out the center section. And kind of just to give you an example, this particular steering wheel is going to be for a client's custom car where I had used the Origin to cut the walnut out, and then I made kind of a neat little sort of dovetail to sort of pin each of the 4 pieces together. And then on the back side, I used Origin with a roundover bit to then create the little finger kind of grooves. I don't know if there's a technical name for that, but
definitely
just kind of and then the front here is kind of sandwiched then around a piece of aluminum that I polished up. So kind of a neat way to juxtapose some polished aluminum with some walnut here. But what I did on this particular steering wheel is I drew out the diameter on AutoCAD, and then just made basically the part that is, so it's really just 4 pieces to create basically one half, and then glued those together with kind of that little dovetail sort of joint. And then I used a standard router table with a big roundover bit to then create more or less the radius. So if you sort of can kind of see, there's the radius on that wood. So you get the perfect circle with the parts cut from origin, and then you get the contour or the profile with just a standard roundover bit from your router table. And then when you glue the 2 pieces together, it makes the nice kind of contour of what we're used to on a steering wheel. Here's another example of just kind of an all wood steering wheel I made, just kind of to mess around with some different techniques of using the origin from using a pocket guide, or the pocket technique, where you cut to the inside and pocket it out, and then put this spoke then on the inside of the rim, and then I use the origin to then cut the 4 quadrants out and basically 2 halves, and then use that same roundover bit on the router table to then get the kind of the cylindrical contour then, so it looks
super nice.
What we,
I think we've got a few slides of some of the process steps of that as well, if we can cut back to that. So there you can see the little slots, or the little alignment pieces with the holes for, was that brass you put through it?
Those are just pieces of those are aluminum pins. Okay. Mm-hmm. What you see in this photo are just some wood dowels, so when I was gluing all the parts up, I could keep everything in an alignment. And if you see in that photo, I cut a full circle out of plywood, so in that way I use the plywood as kind of my glue up jig, and then just put those 1/4-inch dowels through the hole so everything lines up while the glue dries. And then what was great
about gives you something for the roundover bit, yeah? A template, a pattern for that? Yeah? Nice.
Exactly, yep. So that bearing on the router bit then just rides right around that plywood piece there, and then that's how you kind of get that nice, perfect circle then.
This blows my dinky little plywood toy ones I made for my daughter out of the water. Nice.
What you see here is that pocket technique I was telling you about, with how I made this kind of steering wheel. So that spoke is pocketed, basically 1/2 of the front and then 1/2 of the rear of the rim. And then when I glued it together, so yeah, there's what the 2 halves glued together would look like, and then that's been fully round over on all 4 edges on the router, and then kind of assembling everything with the spokes in the pocket there.
Oh, awesome. And then in the chat, Ted's linked out to the it's Christopher Runge, is that right? Runge?
Yeah, this is called his gentleman up, his shop's about 2 hours from me. His name is Chris Runge, and he builds some really neat all-bodied aluminum cars that are his own design, and builds a couple of them a year for people all over the place. And so this is a custom steering wheel we made for one of his clients' cars.
You have to see if he needs any of those, what do they call them? There's down in the Peterson Museum, there's an old Bugatti, is it a block or whatever, that they shape all their aluminium panels around with an English wheel and...
Oh, a buck, yeah.
Buck, that's the one, yeah. He seems to have
a
bunch
you
of
certainly could use yeah, definitely.
Nice one. And then I think, all we've got in terms of I think we've kind of been through with the real live footage was the restoration part of it. So we can maybe just skip back to the slides, slick quickly there, Eric. And we were looking at them there at the beginning. So that's your cold molded sort of workflow and back to the beginning boat. So yeah, that about is a wrap for the section that's focused on an exploration of your shop and your workflows and everything. That's been great having you on board, Kevin. Thank you so much for showing us around, showing us some techniques. Hopefully we can apply some of them to our more pedestrian woodworking projects, or knowing the origin community, some pretty interesting woodworking projects. But that's great.